Hello, and it's Friday, and it's time for our reading. So, as you know, Friday's reading is Extend and Deepen, new text, not looked at it before, and following with our metamate of Wordsmith Wendy. So, as you can see, you can type your answers in this box, which I know you're all loving at the moment, and we've got Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pearce. So, um, I'll have a quick read through the book. It looks like a lot, so I will read it with you, okay? Because I think some of you might look at that and go, ugh. So, if, standing alone on the back doorstep, Tom allowed himself to weep tears, they were tears of anger. He looked his good-bye at the garden, and raged that he had to leave it. Leave it and Peter. They had planned to spend their time here so joyously this holiday. Town gardens are small, as a rule, and the Longs' garden was no exception to the rule. There was a vegetable plot, and a grass plot, and one flower bed, and a rough patch by the back fence. In the last the apple tree grew. It was large, but bore very little fruit, and accordingly the two boys had always been allowed to climb freely over it, so they've always been able to climb over the tree. These holidays they would have built a tree house amongst its branches. So it sounds like it's the summer holidays. He was really excited to be playing in his garden. They were going to build a tree house at the bottom of his garden. Tom gazed and then turned back to the house. We're just here, by the way. As he passed the foot of the stairs, he called up, "Goodbye, Peter!" And there was a croaking answer. He went out onto the front doorstep, where his mother was waiting with his suitcase. He put his hand out for it, but Mrs. Long clung to the case for a moment, claiming his attention first. "You know, Tom," she said, "it's not nice for you to be rushed away like this to avoid the measles, but it's not nice for us either. Your father and I will miss you, and so will Peter. Peter's not having a nice time anyway with measles." "Ah, so. Right, Peter's got the measles. I'm assuming Peter's his brother. So he's got to be sent away, so that he doesn't catch measles." "I didn't say you'll all have a nice time without me," said Tom. "All I was—" "Hush!" whispered his mother, looking past him to the road and the car that waited there, and the man at its driving wheel. She gave Tom the case, and then bent over him, pushing his tie up to cover his collar button, and letting her lips come to within a few inches of his ear. "Tom, dear Tom," she muttered, trying to prepare him for the weeks ahead. "Remember that you will be a visitor, and do try—oh, what can I say? Try to be good." She kissed him, gave him a dismissive push towards the car, and then followed him to it. As Tom got in, Mrs. Long looked past him to the driver. "Give my love to Gwen," she said, "and tell her, Alan, how grateful we are to you both for taking Tom off in such short notice. It's very kind of you, isn't it, Tom?" "Very kind," Tom repeated bitterly. "There's so little room in the house," said Mrs. Long, "when there's illness." "Ah, we're glad to help," Alan said. He started the engine. Tom wound down the window next to his mother. "Goodbye, then." "Oh, Tom," her lips trembling, "I'm sorry. Spoiling the beginning of your summer holidays like this." "We're just here if you've lost it." The car was moving. He had to shout back, "I'd rather have measles with Peter. I'd much rather." Tom waved goodbye angrily to his mother, and then, careless even of the cost to others, waved to an inflamed face pressed against a bedroom window. So the inflamed face must be Peter. Inflamed means very swollen. Mrs. Long looked upwards to see what was there, raised her hands in a gesture of despair. Peter was supposed to keep strictly to his bed, and hurried indoors. Tom closed the car window and sat back in his seat, in hostile silence. His uncle cleared his throat and said, "Oh, I hope we get on reasonably well." This was not a question, so Tom did not answer it. We're there. He knew he was being rude, but he had made excuses for himself. He did not much like Uncle Alan, and he did not want to like him at all. Indeed, he would have preferred him to be a brutal uncle. "If only he'd beat me," thought Tom. "Then I could run away home, and mother and father would say I did right, in spite of the quarantine for measles. But he'll never even try to beat me. I know, and Aunt Gwen's worse. She's worse, 'cause she's a child lover and she's kind. Cooped up for weeks with Uncle Alan and Aunt Gwen in a poky flat." He'd never visited them before, but he knew that they lived in a flat with no garden. That's clearly his biggest problem, isn't it? And you guys know what it's like at the moment. They drove in silence. Their route took them through Ely, but there only stopped for Alan Kitson to buy a picture postcard of the cathedral tower. It was for Tom. Tom was bitterly disappointed that he was not allowed to climb the tower, but his uncle pointed out to him with great reasonableness that this was quite out of the question. He was in quarantine for measles. He must not mix with Peter, in case he caught the measles, and he must not mix with other people either, in case he already had Peter's measles. Fortunately, the Kitsons had both had measles anyway. So this is this is very linked to what's happening in the world, isn't it? Measles used to be a very similar problem, but we have a measles vaccine, a measles jab. So if it helps a little bit, this isn't new in history, what we're experiencing. They drove on through Ely and the Fens, and then through Castleford and beyond, to where the Kitsons lived in a big house, now converted into flats. The house was crowded round with newer, smaller houses that beat up to its very confines in a broken sea of bay windows and gable ends and pinnacles. Ooh, there's some words. It was the only big house among them, oblong, plain, grave. Alan Kitson sounded the car horn and turned into the drive, only it was really too short to be called a drive now. The house has a better frontage, I believe, and so they built up opposite, and had to widen the road too. He pulled up outside a pillared front door. Pillared front door, that'd be like those nice ones where you've got nice big pillars, and then your doors in the middle of it. And Aunt Gwen appeared in the doorway, laughing and wanting to kiss Tom. She drew him inside, and Uncle Alan followed with the luggage. There were cold stone flags under Tom's feet, and in his nostrils a smell of old dust that it had been nobody's business to disperse. As he looked around, he felt a chill. The hall of the big house was not mean, nor was it ugly, but it was unwelcoming. Here it lay at the heart of the house, for it went centrally from front to back, with a sideways part to the stair foot in a T shape. So, sounds like you can go kind of like that in the house. You can go left and right or straight ahead. Someone had pinned bright travel posters on the high grey walls. Someone had left a laundry box with its laundry list in a corner. There was an empty milk bottles against a far door, with a message to the milkman. None of these things really seemed to belong in the hall. It seemed empty and silent. Silent, unless one counted the voice of Aunt Gwen chattering on about Tom's mother and Peter's measles. When her voice died for a moment, Tom heard the only sound that went on. The tick, and then the tick, and then tick, of a grandfather clock. "Ah, no, don't touch it, Tom," said Aunt Gwen, as he turned towards it. She lowered her voice. "It belongs to old Mrs. Bartholomew upstairs, and she's rather particular about it." Tom had never looked inside a grandfather clock, and he thought it might be something to do later, privately. Surely he could just look. Now, with his back to the clock, innocently continuing to converse with his aunt, he slipped his fingernails under the edge of the door of the pendulum case to try it. If Mrs. Bartholomew is particular about her clock, why doesn't she have it upstairs with her? Tom asked. He levered gently with his nails. The door was resisting him, because the clock is screwed to the wall at the back, and the screws have rusted in. Come away from it. Come on, do, Tom. Come up for tea. Right, so, long bit of text to read there, but nothing too challenging, other than maybe some words that you might not know because of the age of the story. Definitely written in the 1900s, I believe. That's kind of the turn of the century. Let's have a little look at these questions. I'm aware that because I've read that, the video's a bit longer, but I'll just have a quick run through the questions. When Tom speaks at the top of page 13, how might he sound? So, I've done it again. I've cropped off the pages. It's the only one where he's talking at the top. Because it says here, Tom repeated bitterly. If something's bitter, it's not a nice taste. So, if you reply bitterly, it means you've not said it in a nice way. So number one is going to be, he might sound unhappy or even unkind. And remember, we need to know why. because bitter is usually a bad taste. There you go. So I'm just giving a little reason as to why I think it's unkind. It's because of the word bitter. Number 2. Sorry, that was number 1. What do you think bore little fruit means about the apple tree? So the apple tree's up here, isn't it? Oh, here we go. In this last, the apple tree grew. It was large, but bore very little fruit. Something about very... Even if you don't know what bore means, the next bit is very little fruit. So it must mean to have, or to grow. So I'm going to just put to have, as it would make sense. Number 3. Town gardens are small as a rule. What does this mean? Well, it means that as a rule is the bit you need here. As a rule means well, a rule is something that is followed, isn't it? So it means that most town gardens, townhouses, have very small gardens. Because as a rule, it's kind of like, well, as a rule, this is what they do. Okay, it means in general. Number 4. Find a copy of the word which means swollen. Oh, I gave you that answer in the... if you listened along with the story, I gave you that answer. It's inflamed face. It's inflamed. Oh, is it double M? No. Number 5. What do you think Tom means by a pokey flat? A pokey flat. And like I said in the other video, I'm not going to write out the answers for the blue ones. A pokey flat. Well, if we find pokey flat, where is it? She lives in a pokey flat. I remember reading it somewhere. You might have to skim read a little bit. Ooh. Oh, I'm not going to be able to find it now. But pokey means very small. I don't know why. I don't know where it comes from. Might have to have a look myself at that. A pokey flat. I don't know whether it's because there's not enough room to poke. I'm not quite sure. But pokey means very small. And can still be used today. And number 6, what impression of the house do you get when the heart of the house is described? So the heart of the house is on this bit here. It's in this final page. So it's in this bit here. What impression do you get? Well, the fact that it says it was unwelcoming, it was empty, cold and dead. High grey walls. They're the words you want to be picking out. I get the impression that it's a house that doesn't feel like you want to stay, or hasn't been lived in, or there's no warmth, as in people warmth. You know, like loving warmth, like in A Christmas Carol with the Cratchits. You know, if it's empty, cold, and dead, then maybe there's not a lot of whoever owns it. Maybe there's not a lot. I think it's telling you about the owner. Okay. Remember, it's not his auntie. His auntie lives in a room in this big house. So I'd be interested to see how you get, what impression you get from the house, and which words you refer to. Okay, but well done, fantastic. Don't know if the questions are necessarily tricky, but it's the length of the text that I think might catch some of us out. So I'd be interested to see how you get on with this. Thank you for listening with the video if you wanted to follow along, and I look forward to seeing your work. Well done, guys.